I gave my whole life to building a home for my son, only to be told by his wife that I was nobody. Her words didn't just cut, they shattered what little spirit I had left. I scrubbed their floors, watched their child while they traveled, and handed over the deed to the house I built with my late husband. I thought I was offering love. She saw me as a burden. That day, something in me snapped. I refused to be trampled on any longer. My name is Ruth Delaney, and I live in Charleston, South Carolina. And while they thought I handed them everything, they didn't know I had one last card, and it was worth millions. I didn't move in to be a burden. I moved in to help to be useful. My name is Ruth Delaney, and I'm a 68-year-old widow from Charleston, South Carolina. After my husband passed, I sold our smaller lake house and moved into the guest room of my son's home, thinking it was a blessing to be closer to my only grandchild. I thought we were a family, a team. I had no idea I was walking straight into a role I never auditioned for: the live-in maid, the unpaid nanny, the invisible nobody. In the beginning, I didn't mind the small things. I washed dishes while they rested. I rocked the baby at 3 a.m. while they slept. I offered to pick up groceries, prep meals, even clean the bathroom. Let me help, I said. And I meant it. Because that's what love does. It sacrifices, quietly, consistently. My daughter-in-law, Mara, was polite at first. Smiles that never reached her eyes. Thank yous that sounded like obligations. But I ignored it. I wanted so badly to be accepted, to be needed. I told myself she was just overwhelmed. She was a new mother after all. So I stayed. I folded my independence and my pride into neat little corners, packed it into that small guest room, and told myself I was doing the right thing. What no one told me, what no one warns you, is how easily love can become exploitation when it goes unreciprocated. Months passed, and my presence shifted from welcomed to tolerated. Mara started saying things like, "Oh, Ruth will take care of it," or "She doesn't mind doing the laundry." They stopped asking. They just expected. I heard her once late at night, whispering to my son in the kitchen, her voice bitter and sharp. "Your mom just inserts herself into everything. I can't breathe in my own house." I stood on the staircase, frozen, the plate of folded baby clothes still in my arms. I should have left then, but I didn't. Because mothers stay. Mothers hope. Mothers forgive too much. Then came the house. It was my husband's idea years ago to put our names on the deed to this family property, a colonial brick home with oak trees out front and white shutters that needed constant repainting. When he died, it passed to me entirely. And when Mara began to push for renovation's open concept, she said new appliances, a smart kitchen. I thought maybe this is my chance to finally be accepted. So I signed it over, gave them the deed, handed them not just a house, but my history, my safety net, my last piece of him. "Now it's yours," I said with a smile, handing them the keys. She took them without looking me in the eye, and that was the moment something shifted. Not just in the house, in me. Once the property was legally hers, she stopped pretending. The little barbs became sharper, bolder. "You're always in the way, Ruth. Don't you think you should ask before rearranging the pantry? This is our home now." One morning, I came into the kitchen and found her scrubbing the counters, her eyes red with irritation. Honestly, she muttered under her breath, "I don't know why you're still here. You're just nobody." Nobody. That word has never left me. I froze. Not because I was surprised I wasn't. Deep down, I'd felt the slow erasure of my presence for months. But to hear it aloud, to have my life, my sacrifices, my love, my very identity reduced to nobody. I walked back to my room that day with trembling hands, sat on the bed, looked at the walls, the photos, the stacks of neatly folded baby clothes I'd lovingly washed. And for the first time, I didn't cry. No, I didn't weep. I awakened. I looked at my reflection and whispered to myself, "I am not nobody, and I will not be dismissed like one." The truth is, I had resources. My late husband didn't just leave me a house, he left me something far more powerful, something Mara had no idea existed, an untouched investment portfolio tied to a series of beachside rental properties I never touched. It had grown over time, quietly, slowly, almost forgotten, until that day. So I made a call to my lawyer and to myself. I decided then I would give her exactly what she wanted: the house, the keys, the illusion of victory. And then I would take back everything she never knew I controlled. Because even nobody's carry secrets. And mine could rebuild a kingdom. I never should have signed the papers, I see that now. But back then I just wanted to belong. I wanted to matter. When Mara first brought up the idea of remodeling, she said it so casually, like it wasn't a big deal. The kitchen's outdated, she'd said, flipping through glossy catalogs at the breakfast table. And the wiring in the back hallway shorts out all the time. Honestly, this whole house needs work. I nodded along, half listening, half choking on the knowledge that the wiring had been done by my husband's own hands. This home was our legacy, brick by brick. Still, I offered I can pay for some repairs, but Mara hesitated, then smiled thinly. Actually, we were thinking maybe it's time you put the house in our name. You've talked about retiring, more traveling. It would give us the flexibility to handle the mortgage, get a loan for the updates. We can take it from here. I should have paused. I should have heard the word replace buried beneath her polite phrasing. Instead, I smiled and said, "Of course, dear. That's how they do it, isn't it?" The slow fade. One favor at a time until your worth is worn down to convenience and love. Well, it's a currency too, and once you run out of usefulness, they stop cashing in. A week later, we were in a notary's office. I remember my hand trembling as I signed the deed. "Are you sure?" the man behind the desk asked me gently. "You're transferring full ownership." I looked at my son, Mark. His eyes were downcast, avoiding mine. And Mara, she beamed like she'd won the lottery. "I'm sure," I whispered. And just like that, the house was no longer mine. At first, they played nice. Renovations started, walls came down, contractors came and went. Mara took over every inch of the house with the precision of a conqueror. The floral curtains I'd hung were boxed up. My reading chair disappeared. Even the rose bushes my husband planted were yanked out to make space for a more modern layout. I swallowed my grief. I told myself it was just a house. But it wasn't. It was the last place my husband ever held my hand. It was where my son took his first steps. It was the only piece of home I had left. And I had signed it away. Soon I noticed changes in other places too. Suddenly, I was no longer mom or grandma, I became her. As in, can she pick up the dry cleaning or tell her not to use that bathroom, it's being retiled. The final blow came when Mara installed a lock on the pantry. Yes, the pantry. She told me it was to keep the baby out, but I knew better. It was to keep me out. One night, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen again. Mara was frustrated about money, about the renovations going over budget. Mark mumbled something about selling the house, and Mara said, "It's ours now." She gave it to us. Let her rot in that room for all I care. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the floor with the envelope I kept hidden inside my suitcase, an envelope with all the financial records my husband left behind, stocks, properties, an old business partnership I'd never tapped into, and one line of handwritten instructions from him: "If you're ever alone, Ruth truly alone, remember you are not powerless." That was the night I understood. Mara hadn't just taken my home, she'd taken my dignity, and I had let her. But I still had one thing she didn't know existed: leverage. The very next day, I met with Henry Caldwell, my husband's old business partner, and our family attorney. He looked over the portfolio and blinked. "Ruth, this is significant. Why haven't you touched any of this?" I shook my head, because I never needed to. Until now. He leaned forward. "What are you planning?" I met his eyes. "I'm planning to vanish, but not before leaving a few gifts behind." We spent the next few weeks quietly untangling everything. I didn't want revenge, not the petty kind. What I wanted was closure, control, peace. I rewrote my will. I moved my investments. I transferred ownership of the beachside rental home in Savannah into my name and made sure it stayed private. And I made a plan to disappear legally, quietly, completely. All while still washing their dishes, still rocking their baby, still smiling when they walked past me like I wasn't there. Because the best revenge I've learned isn't loud, It's quiet. It's watching someone believe they've won right before the floor vanishes beneath them, and I was about to pull the floor out with grace. It was my grandson's 3rd birthday. The house was full of guests, laughter echoing off the newly painted walls I hadn't been consulted about. Mara had hired a catering company. There were balloons in tasteful neutral tones, a photo booth backdrop with his name in gold cursive letters, and a giant bounce house in the backyard. Not a single homemade dish on the table. Not a single trace of me. I'd offered to help, of course. I'd asked if I could make his favorite lemon cupcakes. Mara smiled and said, "We've got it covered, Ruth." 3 hours later, I watched store-bought cake being served with plastic smiles. I sat on the edge of the crowd, invisible, like an old armchair you can't throw out but don't want anyone to see. I held my paper plate and tried to eat around the lump in my throat. And then, like all things that fester in silence too long, it exploded. I had gotten up to help a guest with their coat when someone bumped into me, causing me to drop a tray of cutlery. I bent down quickly to pick it up. The guest apologized, clearly flustered. Before I could say, "It's okay," Mara walked in, saw the scene, and snapped. "Seriously, you're always in the way." Her voice was sharp enough to silence the room. I froze, halfway crouched on the floor like a child who'd been scolded in front of the class. Mara Mark muttered awkwardly, trying to laugh it off. But she wasn't done. She turned to the nearest guests, her friends, and said loud enough for everyone to hear. I mean, I don't even know why she's here half the time. She just lurks, like some nobody. That word again. Nobody. This time she said it on purpose. The laughter in the room died. No one looked at me. Not even my son. My hand still clutching the silverware knees on hardwood. It was the first time I felt truly hollow, not angry, not heartbroken, just gone. I stood up slowly, dignity cracking inside me like thin porcelain. I placed the utensils on the counter, straightened my sweater, and left the room without saying a word. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of my bed. My heart beat loudly in the quiet. I stared at the framed photo of my wedding day, the only one I hadn't let them box up, and I whispered to it like I used to whisper to my late husband in the dark, "It's time." I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry either. I packed instead, quietly, carefully. I folded everything I owned into 3 suitcases, leaving behind the things that were never really mine anymore. The house, the kitchen, the nursery. I decorated by hand, the garden bench where I used to read to my grandson. At dawn, I put the suitcases in the back of a taxi and took one last walk through the house. Mara was still asleep, so was Mark. I left a note on the kitchen counter. "Thank you for showing me who I am to you. I may be nobody to you now, but you were once my whole world. The keys are in the drawer. The house is yours. For now. Ruth." Then I left. No announcement, no scene. Just silence. The kind that sinks in and stays. Henry, my lawyer, picked me up at the corner store 2 blocks away. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me walk away. He drove me straight to Savannah, to the beachside property my husband left me in secret, now fully transferred and legally protected under a trust neither Mark nor Mara could touch. I stood in the doorway of that quiet, sunlit home and let the ocean breeze hit my face. I was free, but I wasn't done. I contacted the bank, who still had record of the loan request Mara had filed to fund their renovations, a loan based on collateral the house I had gifted to them, or so they thought. Because while I had handed them the deed, I had never removed a particular clause, an old stipulation added by my husband long ago. If the current owner vacates the property for longer than 60 consecutive days, ownership reverts to the original trust, and I had just hit day 61. It took a few quiet legal filings, and then came the phone call. Mara frantic, Mark confused. "Mom, where are you?" I didn't answer. They never expected that the house they'd used to bury me would rise up to bury them in return. I never wanted to be the kind of woman who disappeared without a word. I never wanted to be the kind of mother who watched her son drown in his own choices. But they left me no place to stand, so I found another. When I arrived in Savannah, the beach house was exactly as I remembered it, a little worn, a little lonely, but entirely mine. My husband Patrick had purchased it quietly during the last years of his life, when he knew his illness might take him before he was ready. For you, he had whispered once when we'd come to watch the sunset from the back porch, just in case the world ever turns on you. Back then, I never believed it would. Now I was standing in the doorway clutching the keys to a future I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. I lived quietly at first. I didn't tell anyone where I was except Henry, our longtime attorney and Patrick's old friend. He was the one who helped me initiate the clause reversal on the house deed. It wasn't immediate, no good revenge is, but it was precise and legal. The reversion clause had been buried under years of amendments, but it was valid. The moment I vacated the Charleston house for 60 days without filing formal intent to return it, triggered automatic review and returned to the original trust me. They'll challenge it, I said over tea one morning, staring out at the waves. Let them, Henry replied. They'll lose. We filed everything quietly. Mara and Mark were too busy flaunting their renovated home on social media to notice the storm brewing beneath their foundation. I watched as she posted photos of their new bathroom, her designer kitchen backsplash, their prideful captions dripping with ownership. She really believes it's hers, I said. Henry nodded. Entitlement often screams loudest right before it shatters. Still, I wasn't sleeping well. Not because of guilt, I'd already buried that beneath too many silences, but because I kept asking myself, how did I let it get this far? The answer hurt, because I raised my son to believe I would never leave, that no matter what, I would stay. And somewhere along the way, that belief turned into expectation, then entitlement, then neglect. I enabled their cruelty with my patience. I fueled their greed with my giving. And I buried my identity under their convenience. But not anymore. Each day in Savannah, I grew a little stronger. I walked along the shore every morning with a mug of tea, letting the salt air clear out the heaviness in my lungs. I read books I hadn't touched in years. I planted herbs. I danced barefoot on the back porch when no one was watching. I was healing quietly, defiantly in the sunlight they never let me feel. Still, part of me wondered, would they ever even notice I was gone? It took 74 days. That's when I got the first voicemail from Mark. Mom, please call me. We got a letter from the bank. Something about the house title. I don't understand what's going on. Mara's freaking out. I didn't call back. The next day, another message. This has to be a mistake. Can you just explain what's happening? The bank says we're not the legal owners anymore. They're freezing our refinance. Mom, please. I listened, sipping my tea. And I thought, so now I'm somebody. But I wasn't trying to punish them anymore. I didn't want them to suffer. What I wanted was truth. And the truth was, they had built a life on a foundation they didn't own literally and emotionally. They used my love, my labor, my loyalty. And they assumed I would never leave, never fight, never win. But they were wrong. On day 78, I got an email from the bank confirming the reversion clause was now fully executed. The house had reverted to my trust, legally, irrevocably, entirely. All debts attached to the property were now null unless I chose to reclaim them. I had the power again. Henry asked if I wanted to evict them. I said no. Let them feel the floor shaking beneath them. Let them come to me. And they did. On day 81, Mara called. I didn't answer. On day 84, Mark sent an email. Mom, I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. I should have protected you. I didn't know how bad things had gotten. Please, can we talk? But I wasn't ready. Because I needed him to feel for just a little longer what it's like to be invisible. To be nobody. Just as they'd made me feel. I stood on the shore that evening, waves crashing around my ankles, and whispered, I didn't want this, but I needed it. Because some victories aren't about proving others wrong. They're about proving to yourself that you were right to leave. The morning I left Charleston, I stood in the hallway with the house keys in one hand and my suitcase in the other. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass window above the staircase, the one Patrick and I installed together. My grandson's laughter echoed faintly from the backyard where Mara and Mark were hosting yet another garden brunch. They didn't even know I was leaving. I laid the keys gently in the top kitchen drawer right next to the instruction manuals I used to file every year, and I left a note. Not dramatic, just quiet. You've made it clear that I am no longer welcome. I've decided to give you everything you believe you've already taken. I hope someday you understand what that cost you. The house is yours now. Enjoy it while you can. Ruth. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I simply walked out. The taxi driver didn't speak much, but he glanced at me once in the mirror and said, "Leaving for good." I nodded. Yes, but not in the way you think. He chuckled softly. Good for you. By the time I reached Savannah, Henry had already stocked the beach house with basic groceries, fresh linens, and even set up the garden hose just the way I liked it. There was a bottle of wine on the counter and a note from him that read, "To new beginnings and better endings." I stood on the back porch breathing in salt air and peace for the first time in years. The waves crashed softly in the distance as if applauding. I was alone, but for once, not lonely. I had finally stopped begging to be seen. What came next, though, surprised even me. Mara didn't just panic, she unraveled. The bank contacted her 2 weeks after my departure, informing her that the deed transfer was now in dispute due to the reversion clause they'd never bothered to read. Legal ownership was frozen, loans were paused, lines of credit denied. And then came the letter, the primary title holder has been reassigned to the original trust of Ruth Delaney. That's when the calls started. First Mark, then Mara, then Mark again. I ignored them all. Because sometimes silence is the most honest sound in the world. I watched their life unravel from afar, not with joy, but with sobering clarity. They had built their home on my sacrifice, my grief, my bones, and called it theirs. They painted over memories and called it progress. And now they were being forced to look at what they had buried. On the 32nd day of silence, I received a letter, an actual letter, not an email or voicemail. It was from Mark. "Mom, I've been going over everything, the loan, the clause, the trust. I know now what we did. Mara treated you horribly and I let her. I let you be erased from your own home. I'm sorry, I don't expect forgiveness. I miss you. Please tell me where you are. Let me see you, even if it's just once." I held the paper to my chest and wept, not because I forgave him yet, but because he finally remembered who I was. Still, I didn't reply. Not yet, because he hadn't seen the full picture. You see, I had planned something else not to hurt them, but to ensure that no one ever took me for granted again. A legal document, a property shift, a letter to the county, and one final clause added to the trust. If Mark or Mara ever attempt to evict me again or use the property against my will, they will lose all rights to it, forever. It wasn't revenge. It was protection. It was dignity, on paper, ironclad. 1 month after my departure, Mara showed up. At my beach house, I saw her through the window before she even knocked. Her hair was tied back hastily, her designer bag sagging at her side. She looked smaller, paler, and for the first time, not in control. I didn't rush to open the door. I let her knock twice. Then I opened it slowly, silently. She stood there with tear-glossed eyes, and for a long moment we just stared at each other. Then she whispered, "Please, I didn't know how much I needed you until you were gone." And I said nothing, because for once it was her turn to sit in silence, to feel what I had felt for 3 years. Eventually I stepped aside and let her in. But it wasn't a homecoming. It was the start of reckoning. She didn't look like the woman who used to bark orders across the kitchen. When Mara stood on the porch of my beach house, she looked small, deflated. Not in the way that begged pity, but in the way of someone who'd finally realized that their arrogance wasn't armor. She held herself stiffly like someone used to winning now learning how to lose. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I said nothing, just stepped aside and let her in. She sat on the edge of the living room sofa like a guest in a stranger's home, her hands folded in her lap, eyes roaming the cozy space. The floral curtains, the worn armchair, the smell of salt and lavender in the air, none of it looked like her world. And maybe that's why she looked so afraid. "I didn't come to beg," she said after a long silence. "I just wanted to explain." I didn't answer, I only watched. She swallowed hard. We lost the house. I already knew, of course. The bank had confirmed days ago that the mortgage had defaulted when they attempted to refinance under a title they no longer held. Mara and Mark had tried to leverage the house for another loan, believing the deed they held was final. But it wasn't. Not with the reversion clause still binding in the trust. She continued, I thought you were trying to destroy us, but now I realize you were just reclaiming what we never had a right to. I raised my eyebrow. She sighed. I said things I can't take back. You did more than say them, I replied, my voice steady. You made sure I heard them. Her lips trembled. You were always cleaning, always around. I felt judged, like I couldn't breathe in my own home. It was never your home, I said simply. You just lived in the one I built. That silenced her. She stared down at her hands. I don't expect forgiveness. I know, but I need you to know I'm sorry. The words hung there between us, fragile, late, but real. I let them linger, let her sit in the stillness the way I had in that back room of my own house, silent, dismissed, forgotten. And then after a long moment, I rose and poured her a cup of tea. Because forgiveness, like revenge, isn't always a declaration. Sometimes it's an action. Sometimes it's letting someone sit across from you and see you not as a burden, not as a shadow, but as the woman they tried to erase. I've changed the trust, I told her quietly. You'll never be able to use that house against me again, ever. She nodded. I'm not coming back, I added. This is my home now. Tears welled in her eyes. I understand. Then came the softest words I never thought I'd hear from her. I miss you. I set my cup down. You miss the help, the comfort, the convenience, not me. She shook her head. No, I miss you, Ruth. I miss your calm, your steadiness. I miss the way you held our son's hand when he was falling apart, the way you used to hum while folding his shirts. I didn't understand what it meant to have that kind of love in the house. And now, she said, her voice breaking, I understand what it means to lose it. We sat there in silence, two women who had once lived under the same roof but never truly seen each other. Now we finally did. After a while, she stood. I won't bother you again, but I'm glad I saw you, even if it was just to say goodbye. She moved to the door, pausing before opening it. I spoke one final time. Mara. She turned. I forgive you. Her mouth opened in shock. You do? Yes, but not for you. For me. Because carrying that pain is too heavy, and I've carried too much already. Tears fell freely now, and for the first time I saw her as human, flawed, frightened, and perhaps beginning to change. She left without another word. I watched her walk away, and then I locked the door, not out of anger, but out of peace, because I was done letting people in who didn't see my worth. I watched her walk down the sandy path until she disappeared behind the dunes. The sound of her footsteps faded beneath the crash of waves, and when the breeze picked up, I closed the door softly behind me, not with anger, not with pride, just peace. I sat back in the chair by the window, the one that faced the ocean, and let the silence settle into my bones. Not the kind of silence I used to dread in that back room, the one that screamed I was forgotten, but a warm, healing silence. One that reminded me I had survived. I had reclaimed my voice. I forgave her. I meant it. Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's not about letting someone off the hook. It's about choosing to let go of the weight that's been pressing on your soul. And that day, as I stared out over the shoreline, I laid down the weight of years spent begging to be seen. But forgiving her didn't mean I'd return. No. I had already buried too much of myself in that house, my pride, my time, my health, even the memory of my husband. I'd let them dig up every piece of my identity and hang it on a wall like something outdated. So I left it all behind. I found new routines in Savannah. I joined a book club at the local library. I hosted neighbors for quiet dinners on my back deck. I planted sunflowers in the yard and sang to them while I watered them each morning. They listened better than my own blood ever had. Mark came once, alone. He stood on my porch like a man whose boyhood had finally caught up with him. He didn't ask to come inside, just stood there with a bundle of wildflowers and eyes full of pain. "I should have protected you," he said. I nodded. "Yes, you should have." He swallowed hard. "Do you think maybe one day you'll let me try again?" "I don't know," I replied honestly, "but I'm open to starting small." So we did. Letters, once a month, handwritten. Sometimes a postcard with just a memory. Remember that Christmas Dad slipped on the ice but didn't spill a drop of cider. Other times, longer letters, I asked Mara why she never thanked you for watching Theo all those nights. She cried. For a long time. Healing began slowly, but I never went back. Because going back would mean erasing the journey I took to find myself again. And I had fought too hard for this version of me, Ruth Delaney, not a background character in someone else's story, but the author of her own ending. And if that ending was quiet, peaceful alone, then so be it. Because I had found something far more precious than family approval. I had found my freedom. Are you going through something like I did? Have you ever given your all only to feel invisible in return? If so, I see you. I understand you. And you are not alone. Please share your story with me in the comments. Let it be heard, let it be felt. I hope my journey brought some comfort or strength to your heart today. If it did, I humbly ask please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Let's make sure no one else suffers in silence. Let's remind each other we are never nobodies. Not now, not ever.